The summer heat in Charleston clung to the city like a damp sheet. The cobblestone streets near the Battery shimmered with late afternoon light, and cicadas droned in the magnolia trees. To anyone else, it was a beautiful evening in South Carolina, but to Daniel Mercer, the air felt heavy, suffocating, as if the world itself was pressing down on his chest. He sat in the living room of the small, historic home he and his wife, Claire, had bought 5 years ago. Exposed brick walls, white crown molding, and antique hardwood floors gave the house character, Claire's dream home. But tonight, the space felt unfamiliar. He sipped bourbon slowly, letting the burn anchor him. Claire was late. Again. Daniel glanced at the clock above the fireplace, 8:17 p.m. She had texted an hour ago saying, running behind. Don't wait for me. But he had waited, reheating the shrimp and grits he made twice already. Claire was a nurse practitioner at MUSC, and long hours weren't unusual, but something in her tone lately, brisk, detached, made his stomach tighten. He noticed changes in her, small at first. The way she lingered over her phone with a faint smile, how she'd retreat to the bathroom to answer messages. Her perfume, which she'd started wearing again after years of forgetting. The sudden yoga classes on Saturday mornings, though she had never been one for group workouts. Daniel tried to push the thoughts away, but tonight, with the house echoing and the bourbon going down too easily, suspicion gnawed at him. The front door clicked open at 8:42. Claire stepped in, cheeks flushed, hair slightly windblown. She carried no work bag, just her purse. "Sorry, babe," she said quickly, avoiding his eyes as she set her keys in the ceramic dish by the door. It was a long day. Daniel studied her, the way she moved, the nervous energy in her hands. "Long day at the hospital?" he asked evenly. She nodded. "Too fast?" "Yeah. Crazy patients, endless paperwork. You know how it is." Daniel swirled the bourbon in his glass. "You didn't take your bag?" Her eyes flicked to him, then away. "Oh. I left it in the car." "No big deal." She walked to the kitchen, her heels clicking softly against the floorboards. Daniel remained on the couch, staring into the amber liquid. For the first time in their marriage, he realized, he didn't believe her. The next morning unfolded with the same rhythm it always had, the smell of coffee drifting through the kitchen, the sound of toast popping, the soft hum of the ceiling fan above the breakfast table. Yet, for Daniel, everything looked different now. Claire stood at the counter in her scrubs, hair tied back in a loose ponytail, scrolling through her phone while the coffee machine hissed. It should have been ordinary, domestic. But all Daniel saw was the quick way she tilted the screen out of his line of sight when he passed behind her. "You working late again tonight?" he asked casually, pouring himself a mug of coffee. She didn't look up. "Yeah. Evening shift, plus, a quick meeting with some colleagues afterward." "Don't wait up." "Colleagues." Daniel repeated the word silently. Vague. Unanchored. Convenient. He tried to let it go, but the thought followed him all day at the office. Normally, spreadsheets and market reports absorbed him easily, but today, numbers blurred into meaningless shapes. Instead, his mind kept circling back, where was she really? Who was she with? That evening, instead of driving straight home, Daniel made a detour downtown. The sun had dipped low, painting Charleston's historic district in a haze of orange and gold. He passed the antique shops and quiet taverns along King Street until something caught his eye. Claire's car. It was parked near a small bookstore tucked between a wine bar and a boutique. Daniel slowed, his pulse quickening. The hospital was miles away, across the river. He pulled into a space half a block down and waited. Minutes stretched. People strolled by in the warm dusk, couples holding hands, tourists snapping photos of pastel row houses. Then, through the bookstore's wide front window, he saw her. Claire. She wasn't alone. A man stood beside her, tall, well-dressed, maybe mid-30s. She laughed at something he said, her hand brushing his arm lightly. That laugh. Daniel hadn't heard it directed at him in months. The man leaned closer, pointing at a book on the shelf. Claire tilted her head toward him, too close, too familiar. Daniel's stomach dropped. He felt the bourbon from last night burn again in his throat, though he hadn't touched a drop. He gripped the steering wheel, torn between storming inside and staying hidden. His rational mind told him it could be innocent, a colleague, a friend. But his instincts screamed otherwise. When Claire and the man finally left the store together, walking side by side down the street, Daniel started his engine. He followed at a careful distance, every nerve in his body lit with a mix of fear and rage. Daniel followed at a distance, headlights dimmed. Charleston's narrow streets wound like veins through the historic district, and every stoplight felt like a test of his patience. Claire and the stranger walked close, their voices muted by the hum of evening traffic and the laughter spilling out of restaurants. They stopped outside a wine bar, the kind of place with string lights draped across a brick patio and soft jazz floating through the air. The man opened the door for her. Claire smiled, a smile Daniel hadn't seen in years, and slipped inside. Daniel's grip tightened on the wheel. He could have parked and gone in. Confronted them. But something in him wanted proof, cold, undeniable evidence. Without it, she would twist her words, call him paranoid. No, he needed to be certain. He circled the block twice, then parked in an alley with a clear view of the bar's entrance. Minutes bled into an hour. His heart thudded every time the door opened. Finally, they emerged. Claire's hand brushed against the man's as they walked down the street toward her car. Daniel sat frozen as she unlocked her vehicle. The man leaned in, said something, and she laughed again, soft, intimate. Then, as natural as breathing, he placed a hand at the small of her back. She didn't flinch. She didn't pull away. It was enough. That night, Claire slipped into bed well past midnight. Daniel pretended to be asleep, his breathing steady, though rage coiled inside him like a living thing. He smelled the faint trace of wine and unfamiliar cologne on her clothes. The next morning, Daniel's course was set. He began quietly piecing together the puzzle. At work, he logged into their shared phone account. He scrolled through call histories, text logs. One number appeared over and over, usually in the evenings. Short calls, long calls, late-night texts. He wrote it down. Later, when Claire showered, he tried her phone. The screen lit up with a passcode he didn't know. 4 digits, simple, yet suddenly impenetrable. They had never kept secrets before. Now, even numbers on a glass screen separated him from her world. That night at dinner, Daniel tested the waters. "How's work been lately?" he asked. Claire glanced up, chewing slowly. "Busy. Nothing new." "Any new colleagues?" She hesitated, just long enough for him to notice. "A few." "Why?" "Just curious." She smiled faintly, but her eyes flickered down to her plate. Daniel lay awake long after she'd fallen asleep. The ceiling fan spun lazily above, shadows stretching across the walls. In that silence, one truth solidified in his chest: Claire wasn't just drifting away from him, she was giving herself to someone else. And he wasn't going to let it slide. By Friday evening, Daniel could barely keep his composure. At the office, colleagues noticed his short temper, the way he stared too long at his screen without really seeing it. He left early, telling his assistant he wasn't feeling well. In truth, he wanted to be home before Claire. He needed to watch her arrive, needed to study her face. At 6:15, the sound of her car pulling into the driveway made his chest tighten. He stood in the kitchen, bourbon untouched on the counter, as she stepped inside. "Hey," Claire said, dropping her purse on the hall table. "You're home early." Daniel forced a smile. "Yeah. Slow day." His eyes searched her face, flushed cheeks, carefully applied makeup, a perfume she hadn't worn in years. Not hospital perfume. Not long day with patients perfume. She moved toward the fridge. Hungry? I can cook something. Already ordered takeout, he said quickly, watching the flicker of disappointment cross her eyes. Disappointment at not having an excuse to slip away again. They ate Thai food at the kitchen island, the silence between them louder than the clink of forks. Daniel decided to test her. So, who's this new colleague you've been spending time with? He asked casually. Claire's fork froze mid-air. What do you mean? He leaned back, his gaze steady. You mentioned a meeting the other night. I just wondered who was there. Oh. Just, people from work. You wouldn't know them. She forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Daniel sipped his drink, saying nothing. The silence stretched until she shifted uncomfortably. Later that night, when Claire went to shower, Daniel slipped into the hall. Her purse sat on the console table. His heart hammered as he opened it. Inside, her phone. He tried the passcode again. 4 digits. He tried their anniversary, wrong. His birthday, wrong. He pressed the screen dark before it locked him out. But something else caught his eye, a folded receipt. He unfolded it slowly. 2 glasses of wine, 1 charcuterie board. The name of the wine bar downtown. The date matched the night she claimed she'd stayed late at the hospital. His pulse roared in his ears. The next morning, Daniel confronted her indirectly. As she sipped coffee, scrolling her phone, he asked. Did you end up working late Wednesday? I thought I saw your car downtown. Her head snapped up, eyes wide for a split second before narrowing. Why would you be downtown? Had a client dinner, he lied smoothly, studying her reaction. Claire forced a laugh. You must have been mistaken. I was at the hospital all night. Daniel nodded slowly, hiding the rage that burned behind his eyes. The lie slid off her tongue too easily. Too naturally. Something inside him shifted then. Suspicion was no longer enough. He needed the truth laid bare, no matter how much it hurt. And if she wouldn't hand it to him, he would drag it out of the shadows himself. Saturday morning arrived with a low gray sky, the kind that pressed heavy over the city and promised rain. Claire announced she was heading to yoga, her new ritual. She tied her hair in a neat bun, slipped on black leggings, and kissed Daniel on the cheek as she grabbed her mat. Don't wait for me, she said brightly. Might grab brunch after with the girls. Daniel stood at the window as her car pulled out of the driveway. He didn't believe a word. The moment she turned the corner, he grabbed his keys. He followed at a careful distance, weaving through traffic, past the oak-lined streets that dripped with Spanish moss. Claire's car didn't head toward the yoga studio she'd mentioned weeks ago. Instead, she crossed the Ashley River, deeper into downtown Charleston. She parked near the same wine bar. Daniel's chest went cold. From his car, he watched as she got out and met him, the same man from before. Today, in daylight, Daniel saw him clearly, tall, clean-shaven, sharply dressed in a fitted blazer. Confident. Too confident. Claire's smile when she saw him was unmistakable, not polite, not friendly, but warm, intimate. The man leaned in and kissed her cheek. Daniel gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles whitened. He didn't follow them inside this time. He couldn't. Instead, he parked half a block down, heart pounding, mind racing. He needed evidence, something Claire couldn't talk her way out of. He pulled out his phone and snapped a photo of them walking together, their shoulders brushing as they disappeared into the bar. The photo sat in his gallery, a ticking bomb. That night, when Claire came home, she smelled faintly of perfume and wine again. She smiled easily, kissed him quickly, and carried her bag upstairs. Daniel watched her, a storm building inside. He almost confronted her right then. Almost shoved the photo in her face. But something held him back, maybe pride, maybe the desire to make her feel the weight of what she'd done. No. He wasn't ready yet. Instead, Daniel began planning. He reached out to a friend from college who now worked as a private investigator. They arranged a quiet meeting at a bar near the harbor. Over beers, Daniel slid the receipt and the photo across the table. "I need everything," Daniel said. His voice was steady, but his hands trembled around the glass. "Where she goes. Who she's with. How long. I want it documented." The investigator nodded slowly. "You sure you're ready for what I'll find?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "I need the truth." For the first time in weeks, Daniel felt a strange calm settle over him. He no longer had to chase shadows, soon, he would have the light of proof. And once he did, Claire's perfect little mask would shatter. And when it did, he'd be ready. The days that followed were a strange blur for Daniel. On the surface, life moved forward as usual, morning coffee, work emails, dinners at the kitchen island. But beneath the calm, everything had shifted. He no longer hung on every excuse Claire gave, no longer tried to piece together her lies in real time. He had delegated that burden. The investigator worked in silence. Daniel didn't ask for updates, not yet. Each time his phone buzzed, his pulse quickened, wondering if this would be the moment when truth arrived, ugly and undeniable. It came on a Wednesday evening. Daniel was still at the office when his phone vibrated. A message: "We need to meet. Tonight." They met at a small cafe near the harbor, the smell of saltwater drifting in on the breeze. The investigator slid into the booth opposite Daniel and dropped a manila folder on the table. "You wanted proof," he said. Daniel's throat tightened. His hand shook as he opened the folder. Inside were photos, time-stamped, crystal clear. Claire at the wine bar. Claire walking hand in hand down King Street. Claire leaning against the tall man's car as he kissed her, slow and unhurried, in the open air. Daniel's stomach twisted, but he forced himself to look at every photo. Every detail. The expression on her face in those pictures, relaxed, radiant, unguarded, was one he hadn't seen directed at him in years. The investigator's voice was low. "They've met at least 4 times this month. Sometimes during her supposed shifts. Sometimes weekends. Always downtown, never far from his condo." Daniel blinked. "His condo?" "Yeah. Guy's name is Adam Prescott. Real estate developer. Divorced. Late 30s. Been in Charleston about 2 years." He paused. "From what I've seen, it's not casual. She's with him." The words landed like a blow. She's with him. Not just sleeping with him. With him. Daniel closed the folder slowly. His chest felt tight, but his mind was strangely clear. "How much do I owe you?" The investigator shook his head. "Pay me later. Think about what you're gonna do first." Daniel drove home through the rain, windshield wipers slapping against the glass. His knuckles ached from gripping the wheel so hard. By the time he pulled into the driveway, he had already rehearsed it in his head 100 times, the confrontation, the storm, the fallout. Inside, the house smelled of roasted chicken. Claire was at the stove, humming softly to herself, her hair tucked behind her ears. She looked up and smiled. "You're home early," she said. For a moment, Daniel just stared at her, the folder heavy in his hand. He saw the life they had built together, the home, the dinners, the quiet evenings. But all of it was ash now, hollowed out by betrayal. He set the folder on the counter. "Claire," he said, his voice steady but sharp. "We need to talk." Her smile faltered, her eyes flicking down to the folder, then back up to him. Something in her face shifted, just for a second, fear, recognition. And Daniel knew, without a shred of doubt, that the storm was here. For a moment, the kitchen was silent except for the faint hiss of the stovetop. Claire stood frozen, wooden spoon in hand, staring at the manila folder as if it were a live grenade. Daniel didn't move. His voice, when it came, was low and cold. "Go on. Open it." She swallowed, set the spoon down, and slowly reached for the folder. Her hands trembled as she flipped it open. The photos slid out across the counter, her laughing, her leaning against Adam Prescott's car, her lips inches from his. Claire's face drained of color. She pressed her hand to her mouth. "Daniel." His eyes burned, but his voice stayed even. "How long?" Tears welled in her eyes, but she shook her head. "It's not what it looks like." "Don't," he snapped, the word sharp as glass. "Do not stand there in our kitchen and insult me with another lie." Claire's shoulders shook. "I never meant for this to happen. He was just someone I met through work friends. It was supposed to be nothing. I swear to you." Daniel laughed bitterly. "Nothing? That doesn't look like nothing." He shoved one of the photos toward her. "That looks like everything you used to give to me." She flinched as though struck. "Daniel, please. I still love you." His chest tightened. He wanted to believe it, but the images in front of him were louder than her words. "Love me?" His voice cracked, anger bleeding into grief. "You love me, but you spend your nights with him. You love me, but you lie every single day." Claire's tears spilled over. "I was lonely. You've been so distant, wrapped up in work, in your own world. He made me feel seen again." The words hit like a blade. Daniel staggered back a step, shaking his head. "So it's my fault. That's the story now." "No, no, it's not like that," she whispered, reaching for him. "I don't want to lose you." Daniel pulled away, fury flashing in his eyes. "You already lost me, Claire. The second you chose him, you burned this down." The room crackled with silence, broken only by her soft sobs. Finally, Daniel turned, his voice hoarse but resolute. "I'll be talking to a lawyer tomorrow. It's finished." Claire gasped, her hands flying to her face. "Daniel, please, don't do this. We can fix it." But he was already walking out of the kitchen, the folder still in his hand, his footsteps echoing through the house like a verdict. The night after the confrontation, Daniel barely slept. He lay awake on the edge of the bed, staring at the ceiling fan spinning shadows across the walls, while Claire wept quietly beside him. Her sobs felt distant, like echoes in a house he no longer recognized. By morning, he had already made up his mind. At his office downtown, Daniel closed the door, pulled out his phone, and called a divorce attorney recommended by a colleague months ago. He had never imagined he'd need the number, but now, the words came easily. "My name is Daniel Mercer," he said, his voice clipped. "I need to file for divorce. And I want to make sure my wife walks away with nothing she doesn't deserve." The attorney listened carefully as Daniel explained everything: the affair, the evidence, the betrayal. South Carolina law, he learned, still recognized adultery as a fault ground for divorce. With proof, Claire's leverage would crumble. By the end of the call, Daniel felt something new, not just anger, but power. That evening, Claire was waiting for him in the living room. Her eyes were red, her hair unkempt. She looked smaller, fragile in a way he had never seen before. "Daniel, please," she whispered as he walked in. "Don't do this. Don't throw everything away. We can go to counseling, we can start over." He set his briefcase down slowly, meeting her gaze without blinking. "You threw everything away the moment you chose him. Counseling doesn't erase lies. It doesn't erase him." She flinched. "I ended it. It's over." Daniel's laugh was hollow. "Do you think that matters? That you can crawl back after he's had what was mine?" Claire's lips trembled. I was stupid. I didn't want to lose you. You already did, Daniel said coldly. And tomorrow, the whole process begins. Her face crumpled. She reached for him, but he stepped back. For the first time in years, she realized he was untouchable. The following days were brutal for Claire. Papers served. A bank account frozen. Friends she thought she could rely on suddenly distant when whispers of the affair began to spread. Daniel hadn't just filed, he had moved strategically, cutting her out piece by piece. At work, Claire tried to carry on, but the shame clung to her. Patients noticed her distracted smile, colleagues whispered when she passed. Adam Prescott, the man she had risked everything for, stopped answering her calls. By the second week, she learned he had left Charleston altogether, his condo empty, his number disconnected. She had gambled her marriage, and she had lost both men in one swift stroke. Meanwhile, Daniel walked through his days with quiet fury, but also a growing clarity. He wasn't the broken one. He wasn't the one left behind. For the first time in months, he felt in control. But as much as he wanted to move on, one truth haunted him: revenge was satisfying, yes, but it didn't mend the hole she had left in his life. And that hole, no lawyer, no paperwork, could ever fill. The divorce moved faster than Claire could keep up with. Within weeks, Daniel had secured the house, most of the savings, and even custody of their golden retriever, Bailey, her last comfort. She fought in court, but the evidence Daniel had gathered left little room for sympathy. Each day she grew paler, thinner, her eyes shadowed with regret. At work, whispers spread until patients stopped asking for her. Colleagues who once shared coffee with her now gave only curt nods in the hallway. And Adam, the man she had sacrificed everything for, had vanished without explanation, leaving her alone with the wreckage. Daniel, meanwhile, moved like a man possessed. He spent long evenings at the gym, pushing his body until exhaustion dulled the ache inside him. Friends invited him out, urging him to live again, and slowly, he began to say yes. Each time, he felt lighter, stronger. But there were nights when he couldn't escape the silence of the house. Nights when he poured a glass of bourbon, sat in the living room, and remembered her laugh, the way she used to curl against him on the couch, whispering plans for the future. Those memories cut deeper than the betrayal itself. One Friday evening, weeks after the final papers were signed, Claire came back. Not inside, she stood on the sidewalk, staring up at the house as the porch light glowed warmly against the brick. Daniel opened the door, his chest tightening at the sight of her. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I don't know where else to go." For a long moment, neither moved. Rain threatened overhead, the Charleston air thick with summer heat. Her eyes searched his face desperately, hoping for even the smallest crack in his resolve. But Daniel only shook his head. His voice was calm, steady. "You made your choice. And this house, this life, isn't yours anymore." Tears slid down her cheeks, but he didn't move toward her. Didn't touch her. Didn't offer comfort. She finally turned, walking down the street alone, her figure swallowed by the shadows. Daniel stood there until she disappeared, then closed the door behind him. For the first time, it didn't feel like loss. It felt like freedom. Weeks passed. The house, once a battlefield of secrets and lies, had grown quiet. Daniel walked its rooms deliberately, touching surfaces that had once felt like home but now felt like reminders of betrayal. The walls no longer echoed with whispered excuses or laughter meant for someone else. He poured himself a bourbon in the kitchen, set it on the counter, and leaned against the island. Outside, the Charleston skyline glowed softly in the setting sun, the harbor reflecting streaks of gold and orange across the water. For the first time in months, Daniel felt something he hadn't in a long time: peace. He had rebuilt his life on his terms. The divorce was finalized. Claire had nothing, no house, no financial cushion, no lover to comfort her. Her absence was a wound, yes, but it was also a release. He could breathe again. That evening, he drove down to the Battery, the historic promenade lined with oak trees draped in Spanish moss. The river shimmered in the twilight, and the salt-laden air filled his lungs. He thought of the storm he had weathered, the betrayal, the heartbreak, and the careful, calculated revenge that had restored his world. A smile, small and genuine, touched his lips. Not a triumphant, cruel smile, that wasn't who he was, but a quiet, victorious one. He had survived the worst, reclaimed what was his, and learned something essential: trust broken can be replaced by strength, love lost by self-respect. Daniel watched the tide roll in, the waves brushing against the pier. Tomorrow, he would return to his work, his friends, his life, and this time, nothing would hold him back. As the last light faded, he raised his glass to the horizon. To freedom. To survival. To the new life he had earned. And somewhere deep inside, he knew he would never let anyone take that from him again. The city of Charleston settled into the night, quiet but alive, shadows stretching across the streets, but Daniel Mercer, finally, was beyond them. The end.